The rain had been falling for hours, the kind of relentless downpour that blurs the road into a gray ribbon and makes the world feel smaller, colder, and more unforgiving. Headlights stretched into trembling lines on the wet asphalt, and the wind shook the cab of the truck as if testing its resolve. Somewhere along that empty highway, in a moment most people would forget, one ordinary decision was about to change several lives forever. If you believe that kindness still exists in a world rushing too fast to notice pain, take a second right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that second chances are real, and sometimes all it takes is one person to stop. The truck driver's name was Daniel Mercer, though to most people he was just another rig passing by in the night. He had been on the road for nearly 15 years, long enough for highways to feel like home and truck stops to replace living rooms. His life was simple, almost invisible, measured in miles driven and loads delivered. Yet behind the steering wheel was a man carrying his own quiet struggles, the kind that don't make noise but weigh heavily over time. He had lost his wife to illness years ago, and the loneliness that followed had taught him how to keep moving even when his heart felt parked somewhere far behind. That night, Daniel was already behind schedule. The storm had slowed traffic to a crawl, and every delay meant another call from dispatch, another reminder that time was money. His wipers worked overtime, and his hands tightened on the wheel as the rain hammered the windshield. He told himself what he always told himself on nights like this. Just keep going, get there, finish the job, sleep, repeat. It was easier not to think beyond the next mile marker. Then he saw them. At first, they were nothing more than shapes on the side of the road, barely visible through the rain and darkness, a blur of movement where there shouldn't have been any. Daniel eased off the accelerator, his instincts sharpening. As his headlights swept across the shoulder, the shapes became painfully clear. A woman holding a small child close to her chest, another child clinging to her soaked jacket, and a man pushing a broken stroller that barely rolled. They were walking, hunched against the storm, their clothes heavy with water, their faces pale with exhaustion. Daniel felt that familiar tug in his chest, the one he had learned to ignore. He told himself what many would in that moment. It was dangerous to stop. It wasn't his problem. Someone else would help. There were shelters, services, systems for things like this. He had a schedule to keep and a storm to survive. But as he passed them, something happened that refused to let him go. The youngest child looked up, just for a second, and their eyes met through the glass. It wasn't a look of fear or even desperation. It was something quieter and far more powerful. It was the look of a child who had learned not to expect help, but still hoped for it anyway. That look followed Daniel down the road, pressing against his conscience with every turn of the wheel. A mile passed, then another. The rain only grew heavier. Daniel's foot hovered over the brake. His heart argued with his mind. He thought of his wife, of how she used to say that being kind wasn't about grand gestures, but about small moments when you chose not to look away. He thought of how empty the road felt now, how quiet the cab had become. Finally, he exhaled and made the decision. He slowed the truck, signaled, and carefully pulled onto the shoulder, hazard lights blinking against the storm like a pulse. The rain soaked him instantly as he stepped out, but he barely noticed. All he could see was the family behind him, still walking, still fighting against the wind. As they approached, Daniel could see how bad things really were. The man's shoes were torn, the soles flapping with every step. The woman's hands shook, whether from cold or fear, he couldn't tell. The children were silent in that way children get when they are too tired to cry. Daniel didn't need to ask many questions to understand. Family had been traveling for days, their car breaking down miles back with no money for repairs. Shelters were full, phones were dead. The storm had trapped them in the worst possible place at the worst possible time. Daniel opened the passenger door and gestured for them to climb inside. The warmth of the cab hit them like a miracle. Steam rose from their clothes, and the children curled into the seats, their bodies finally allowed to rest. Daniel handed over bottled water and whatever snacks he had left, watching as the parents tried to ration even kindness, making sure their children went first. As the truck pulled back onto the road, something shifted inside Daniel. The weight he carried felt different now, lighter somehow, as if stopping had reminded him why he kept going all these years. He drove carefully, listening to the storm rage outside while a fragile calm settled inside the cab. Miles passed and the rain began to soften. Daniel learned more about the family as they went. They weren't reckless or careless. They were hardworking people who had been hit by a string of bad luck that never seemed to end. Jobs lost, rent overdue, savings drained, hope stretched thin. The road had been their last option, a desperate attempt to reach relatives who might help them start over. Daniel made another decision then, quieter but just as powerful. Instead of dropping them at the nearest town, he drove them to a larger city along his route, one with shelters he knew personally from years on the road. He called ahead using his radio, pulling favors, explaining the situation until someone agreed to stay open late. By the time they arrived, the storm had eased into a gentle drizzle, as if the sky itself had softened. At the shelter, Daniel didn't just leave them at the door. He helped carry what little they had, filled out paperwork, and waited until the children were wrapped in dry blankets and warm food. The parents' eyes filled with a mix of relief and disbelief, the kind that comes when survival suddenly feels possible again. Daniel left quietly after that, not wanting thanks, not needing recognition. He climbed back into his truck and continued his route, the road stretching out ahead of him once more. But something was different. The loneliness that usually followed him felt less sharp. The miles didn't feel as heavy. Weeks turned into months, and life returned to its usual rhythm. Daniel almost convinced himself that the night in the storm was just another memory, another story swallowed by the endless road. He went back to driving, to truck stops and schedules, to quiet meals eaten alone. Then, one afternoon, a letter was waiting for him at a terminal office. It was simple, handwritten, and slightly smudged, as if written with hands that still trembled from remembering. The family had found stability. The man had secured work through a shelter program. The children were in school. The woman had started volunteering, helping others who arrived soaked and frightened, just like they once had. They wanted Daniel to know that his decision to stop had been the turning point, the moment everything changed. Daniel sat in his truck for a long time after reading that letter. He didn't cry, but his eyes burned, and his chest felt full in a way he hadn't felt since before his wife passed. For the first time in years, he felt connected to something beyond the road. Near the end of this story, if it has touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in humanity, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep stories like this alive. Daniel kept that letter in his glove compartment, reading it on hard days and long nights. It reminded him that even in a storm, even when the world feels cold and indifferent, one choice can echo far beyond a single moment. He started stopping more often, helping when he could, not because he thought it would change the world, but because he knew it could change someone's world. Years later, Daniel would still drive that same stretch of highway. The road looked no different, and storms still came without warning. But every time rain hit his windshield and headlights blurred into silver lines, he remembered the family walking in the dark and the decision that followed. Before this story ends, I have a special request. Please comment below and tell us what kindness means to you, or share a moment when someone stopped for you when they didn't have to. Daniel never became famous. He never made the news. he was still just a truck driver to the world. But to one family, he was the reason they survived, the reason they believed again, the reason their children learned that even in the worst storms, help can appear when you least expect it. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do in life is simply to stop,